Mauritius was an official settlement of the Dutch East India Company on the island of Mauritius between 1638 and 1710, and used a refreshing station for passing ships. It was already frequented by Dutch ships from 1598 onwards, but only settled in 1638, to prevent the French and the British from settling on the island. History. It has been frequently hypothesized that Mauritius was first discovered by the Arabs, who named the island Dina Harabi. The first historical evidence of the existence of an island now known as Mauritius is on a map produced by the Italian cartographer Alberto Cantino. In 1502, it is sure that Mauritius was visited by the Portuguese between 1507 and 1513. The Portuguese took no interest in this isolated island, however. Their main African base was in Mozambique, and therefore the Portuguese navigators preferred to use the Mozambique Channel to go to India. The Comoros at the north proved to be a more practical port of call. Thus no permanent colony was established on the island by the Portuguese. Dutch sailors in 1598. A Dutch expedition consisting of 8 ships set sail from the port of Texel under the orders of Admirals Jacob Cornelis van Meck and Wybrand van Warwick towards the Indian subcontinent. The 8 ships ran into foul weather after passing the Cape of Good Hope and were separated. 3 found their way to the northeast of Madagascar, while the remaining 5 regrouped and sailed in a southeasterly direction. On the 17th of September, the 5 ships under the orders of Admiral van Warwick came into view of the island. On the 20th of September, they entered a sheltered bay which they gave the name of Port de Warwick. They landed and decided to name the island Prins Maurits van Nassau-Eiland, after Prince Maurits of the House of Nassau, the stadtholder of Holland, but also after the main vessel of the fleet, which was called Mauritius. From those days, only the name Mauritius has remained. On the 2nd of October, the ships took to the sea again towards Bantam. From then on, the island's Port de Warwick was used by the Dutch as a stopover after long months at sea. In 1606, 2 expeditions came for the first time to what would later become Port Louis in the northwest part of the island. The expedition, consisting of 11 ships and 1,357 men under the orders of Admiral Cornet, came into the bay, which they named Rade des Tortues because of the great number of terrestrial tortoises they found there. From that date, Dutch sailors shifted their choice to Rade des Tortues as harbour. In 1615, the shipwrecking and death of Governor Peter Bothe, who was coming back from India with 4 richly laden ships in the bay, caused the route to be considered as cursed by Dutch sailors, and they tried to avoid it as much as possible. In the meantime, the British and the Danes were beginning to make incursions into the Indian Ocean. Those who landed on the island freely cut and took with them the precious heartwood of the ebony trees, then found in profusion all over the island. Dutch colonization started in 1638 and ended in 1710, with a brief interruption between 1658 and 1666. Numerous governors were appointed, but continuous hardships such as cyclones, droughts, pest infestations, lack of food and illnesses finally took their toll, and the island was definitively abandoned in 1710. The island was not permanently inhabited for the 40 years after its discovery by the Dutch. But in 1638, Cornelius Goya established the first permanent Dutch settlement in Mauritius with a garrison of 25. He thus became the first governor of the island. In 1639, 30 more men came to reinforce the Dutch colony. Goya was instructed to develop the commercial potential of the island, but he did nothing of the sort, so he was recalled. His successor was Adriaan van der Stel, who began the development in earnest, developing the export of ebony wood. For the purpose, Van der Stel brought 105 Malagasy slaves to the island. Within the first week, about 60 slaves were able to run away into the forests. Only about 20 of them were eventually recaptured. In 1644, the islanders were faced with many months of hardships, due to delayed shipment of supplies, bad harvests and cyclones. During those months, the colonists could only rely on themselves by fishing and hunting. Nonetheless, Van der Stel secured the shipment of 95 more slaves from Madagascar, before being transferred to Ceylon. His replacement was Jacob van der Misch. In 1645, the latter brought in 108 more Malagasy slaves. Van der Misch left Mauritius in September 1648 and was replaced by Rainier Paul. In 1652, more hardships befell the colonists, masters and slaves alike. The population was then about 100 people. The continuing hardships affected the commercial potential of the island and a pullout was ordered in 1657. On 16 July 1658, almost all the inhabitants left the island, except for a ship's boy and 2 slaves who had taken shelter in the forests. Thus, the first attempt at colonization by the Dutch ended badly. In 1664, a second attempt was made, but this one also ended badly as the men chosen for the job abandoned their sea commander, Van Nieuwland, without proper treatment, and the latter eventually died. When Dirk Jan Smeant left, he was replaced by George Frederick Reeden. The latter died in 1672, drowned with 5 other colonists during a reconnaissance expedition. His replacement would be Hubert Hugo. The latter was a man of vision and wanted to make the island into an agricultural colony. His vision was not shared by his superiors, and eventually he could not fully develop his vision. Isaac Johannes Lamotius became the new governor when Hugo left in 1677. Lamotius governed until 1692, when he was deported to Batavia for judgment for persecuting a colonist whose wife had refused his courtship. Thus, in 1692 a new governor, Roloff Diodati, was appointed. Even if he tried to develop the island, Diodati faced many problems, like cyclones, pest infestations, cattle illnesses and droughts. Discouraged, Diodati eventually gave up and his replacement would be Abraham Momba van de Velde. The latter fared no better and eventually became the last Dutch governor of the island for that period. Thus the Dutch definitely abandoned the island in 1710. Legacy. The Dutch provided the name for the country and for many regions over the whole island. Some examples include the Peterboth Mountain, the Van der Meersch region near Rose Hill, as well as many other names. They also introduced sugarcane plants from Java. Less admirable was the decimation by the Dutch of the local dodo and giant tortoise population for food, also aided by the introduction of competing species and pests. Large swaths of forests were cut for ebony bark exploitation. The foundations of Fort Frederick Hendrick remain preserved on the island. On 18 November 2010, the Frederick Hendrick Museum was opened by Adko Ekok, Ambassador of the Netherlands in Tanzania, and Mukus Fortuny, Minister of Culture of Mauritius.